Okay, good morning. We're going to be doing a slave cylinder replacement on this 1983 Ford F-250 with a 6.9 liter indirect injected International Navistar diesel engine, non-turbocharged. This is the 250 model with the Dana 44 twin traction beam front axle. It has a T19 Borg-Warner 4-speed manual transmission mated to a Borg-Warner 1345 chain drive transfer case. It is riding on a Dana 61 rear axle with 354 gears in it. Currently on a set of 8 lug 16-inch Steelies 235 85 R16 tires. This truck used to be a C6 automatic with a same 1345 transmission in it, but I changed that out for a T19. That is the fully synchronized version of the T18 4-speed. So here is an overview of what I think I'm going to be needing today. A shitty old flathead screwdriver for prying the slave cylinder off, and this is the slave cylinder with its part number. As you can see, it has this retainer clip on it, which you can take off currently, and which I will be doing to bleed the system, but then I will be putting it back on in order to install it in the truck. Here is your bleeder screw. That's either a 5/32 Allen key or a 4mm Allen key, which I haven't gotten out yet, which I will do shortly. This is your split drift pin. I'm using a 3/32 roll pin punch, and this is the Napa hand tool set, number 305. No, this is a 1/8. So that'll be 4/32. Yeah, 4/32, 2/16, 1/8. Yeah. So it's just slightly smaller, and as you can see, if we remove this retainer clip, this fits through that hole right there. There will be a plastic hydraulic line that runs down to the top of this. This sits in the truck like this. That's its orientation front to back and side to side, if I'm not mistaken. Or maybe, no, it's like this. It's like this. And so that bleeder screw faces up. And the problem with these slave cylinders is I think the internal contours of the piston and other fluid chambers that retain pressure follow the contour of the outside of the slave cylinder, meaning that air gets trapped in the very top of this. So you can spend hours and hours and hours bleeding these slave cylinders and still get nowhere. Which leads me to my next thing. This is a can which is half full of brake fluid, which I currently have covered. It's been well cleaned. You want to do that to make sure that there's no water from rinsing it out that gets absorbed into the hygroscopic brake fluid. I'm just using Prestone .3 jug that I had in the back. Need a funnel, of course, to fill this master cylinder up as well. Brake parts cleaner for any sundry things, rags, of course, and a container over which to do this bleed procedure. Also, it's brake fluid. It'll probably give you cancer, so you want to wear gloves. All right, thank you. All right, so for the purposes of bleeding this, as you can tell, slave cylinder is oriented with its ass upwards. So that way air can travel up and out. I just have a funnel set loosely in the accepting bore. The O-ring that seals the hydraulic line is not in the slave cylinder yet. And I'm going to crack this loose. The 4mm fits a little bit tighter in that bore, so that's the one that I'm going to use. I'm going to start by filling up the slave cylinder first with brake fluid. Now just remember that when you're filling up a master slave cylinder with brake fluid, you always want to immediately cap your brake fluid because it's very hygroscopic. It will absorb water from the atmosphere quite rapidly. At least that's what I was taught in my automotive classes, so it's best practice. All right, so the next thing that I went ahead and did was I filled up the master cylinder with this push rod still pushed all the way in, right? So these tabs were still hooked on either side of the retaining clip here that holds it to the bell housing. These tabs are still hooked in, so this was pressed all the way in. So the piston was as far back as it could go. I filled it up, and I let that, or I pushed it in to get these two tabs to let go. And I let it all the way out, then I filled it up with brake fluid through that funnel, and then I topped it off with just a little brake fluid out of here. And then I put it in this can, right? So I left this off, I cracked the bleeder screw with my 4mm because that seems to fit a little bit tighter, and I tipped it up like this and put it into the brake fluid, and I compressed the piston in right? I push the piston in, and then I let it out, and both of these ports were completely submerged in brake fluid. Now it'll, oh shoot, I don't know what you call it, whenever you, like you suck water up in a straw and then you hold your thumb over the top and you pull it out, and the straw, you know, holds water in it. But it'll do the same thing, which is why, you know, fluid isn't draining out of it currently. But I'm going to keep doing that, and I'm going to make sure that I don't see any bubbles coming back up through the fluid as I am attempting to push the fluid out of the slave cylinder here. And then I'll put the little dust cap back in, and I'll dump all this fluid back in to minimize the water absorbed. And go ahead and put this under the truck. Take the old one out and put the new one in. And before you put the new one in, you're going to want to make sure that this cylinder is all the way compressed. Because if you try to push it back, right, and this is full of fluid, you're either going to push a lot of fluid out of the top of the reservoir, assuming that it's at a proper level and this wasn't leaking, or you're going to be pushing against the resistance of the clutch pedal itself. So either way, you're going to be fighting and fighting and fighting with it. So you're going to want to make sure that this piston is pushed back. These two tabs are engaged with the clip here. And also clean this off of the brake fluid once you're done, because it's quite slippery. It'll make this a whole lot easier. So another thing of note, while you are compressing this piston back in, after the entire master cylinder is full of fluid and, you know, this has been all the way out, you're pushing it back in, make absolutely sure that you do not let it come back out, because that will mean it's sucking air. In that case, you'll have to tip that master cylinder, or that slave cylinder, up, and you'll have to compress it all the way in. It might help to have somebody else hold the slave cylinder while you're doing this, so that way you can put the tabs around. And then what I did at the end was I held my one hand over the two clips, and I put my palm against the other. I dipped the end of it in the brake fluid, and I cycled it just a hair, you know, just that little bit of travel that it has right here, in order to get the residual air out. What I'm looking for down in there, you probably can't see it very well, but there's a meniscus of fluid that's sitting just at the bottom of the hole where the clutch line seals against a rubber O-ring down in there, right? So that's what I want to see. I cycled it back and forth enough times, got all the little residual bubbles out of it, and then I'm going to tighten down the leader screw as well. And that will make sure that no more fluid comes out of it. Now it's a plastic housing, so you don't have to go all fuck nuts and retard strong on it. You just want to make sure that it's snug, and then we can take the clip, or the little seal cap here, put that back in, and she's bench bled. Now, this is the O-ring that the hydraulic line seals against. I don't know what this cotter pin goes to, and this is your split drift pin, 3/32. That will go into the retainer, or retain the clutch line, plastic clutch line. Unfortunately, they did not use double flared fittings, and they used just plastic everywhere on these. So it's really not a great hydraulic clutch setup. I much prefer the mechanical clutches of the old F-150s, although they are stiff as hell. They don't encounter the same problems as these, at least in my experience, which is relatively little with my roommate's old F1 shitty. Anyhow, we're going to bring this master cylinder, we're going to bring the slave cylinder, this screwdriver, this 4mm, this hammer, and this roll pin punch down. Now, you might find it easier with the drive shaft, the front drive shaft in your way, to use a pick or something else to pry against the inside of this. You're going to stick this between this and the bell housing, stick the pick between the clip and the bell housing rather, and pry against it, and that'll loosen this off. Shoot, I can't think of much else. You got to do this kind of quick. I'm going to leave the cap on my master cylinder as well when I do this, so that way it creates an airlock, so that way all the fluid doesn't drain down from the master cylinder through the hydraulic lines onto the ground, or into my drain pan, which is the other thing that I need to bring. Don't forget to put your brake fluid back in your container to keep it from getting contaminated with water. Another thing to note, you want to go inside the truck and you want to make sure that your clutch pedal is at the top of its travel. Now, as you can see, I have damn near half the travel of the pedal before I'm getting any clutch engagement, and that's all the better it was able to get. You're also going to want to look up here. You can see I have jerry-rigged up an arm out of an old ZF573 turbo IDI that was in a junkyard, because this pedal bracket didn't come with one of these leverage arms right here. This bit that kind of goes up. You want to check the tightness of that nut. I think it's a 3/4 up top. And you want to make sure that where this welded push rod, which is not adjustable, goes into the, what would be the arm right there, that there isn't a bunch of slack. I have a bushing out of a 6.6 Duramax caliper slide pin in there, and that fit perfect around this metric 10mm bolt, since all the work that I do is primarily metric. I use nuts and washers to space this nut properly away. An old bolt is probably 2.5 inches long and a nut on the end. But again, you want to make sure that your clutch pedal doesn't have a whole shitload of slack in it. The next thing you're going to want to do is, I don't have a buddy with me currently, but pop the hood. And unfortunately, Ford technical service bulletin for these trucks too, if they weren't retrofitted with it from the factory, where the clutch master cylinder mounts to the firewall, as you can see here, there's already a plate. You can see part of the seam with all the sealer up top here, and it goes sort of around the circumference of where the steering column, brake pedal, and clutch assembly mount to the firewall. But anyhow, this plate from the factory, especially with an automatic truck, is not strong enough to withstand the force applied by the leverage arm from your clutch pedal, and it will cause the firewall to flex, which can, you know, it's not much flex, but in terms of the amount of travel of your clutch pedal, it's amplified greatly. So that can be an issue as well. Yeah, I think that's a coolant leak in the old Ford, but we're engine swapping her here pretty soon. So leave this cap on top of the truck. As you can see, there's an air hole right here, which allows the rubber diaphragm to move up and down as fluid goes back and forth in the reservoir. And this is the plastic line I was talking about, that goes from your master cylinder down to your slave. Also took a clay bar to the old Hilux. She shines nice. Ordered some lift shackles for the back, since she's sagging a bunch from the new, the old bed platform that I made for it, plus the topper and full tank of fuel. She sags pretty bad. People keep writing me. So got some 1.5 inch lift shackles, which I suspicion will give me about 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch of actual lift, since she's loaded down. And the leaf spring is going to be, instead of here where the shackle would be more upright, it's going to be more compressed. So the shackle is going to be back, so the angle of the right triangle is going to be more acute, which means that the distance of the angle opposite of that theta is going to be shorter. So that opposite leg is going to be compressed. So I suspicion, instead of, you know, the full 3.5 to 5 inch distance, that the shackle, well, the shackle center to center is 3.5 stock and 5 inch aftermarket. So I suspicion it'll give me maybe 3/4 of an inch. What did I need back here? Oh, I need a cardboard. Hey, here's a bed platform. There's the old bumper. She did her job, but she took her toll too. Where in the hell did my cardboard go? Oh, it's underneath here. Also, if y'all have any tips about MIG welding with 025 wire with some 20 gauge steel to fix these rust holes that I so delicately cut into the trunk, feel free to give me all of your knowledge. I'm just an illiterate cunt, so go ahead and install that rubber O-ring. Orientation doesn't appear to matter. It appears to be the same both sides. And bring that 3/32 split drift pin back as well. Driver's side of the truck. Next thing that you're going to want to do, as you can see, there's this stupid fucking drive shaft right in the way, which makes this process all the more complicated. Think of screwdrivers that you don't care about. Tip's been broken off of this one. I don't know if you can see, but it's been broken off a few times. So this is my pry-in screwdriver. And then you're going to want to just insert the screwdriver here and pry it against that clip. And it will pop. You can see the slave cylinder moving up there. Yep. Don't worry about the push rod too much. It's not actually attached to anything. Yeah, it's going to pry that slave cylinder out and away. You can see my foil tape here. I was unaware that they came from the factory like this. You don't really have to worry about the heat from the exhaust pipe, which is literally 3 inches away. So that's fine. Yeah, get her unclipped, and once you're about here, you can usually wiggle it out by hand, and then let her dangle. Okay, so since I don't live in a state where there's a lot of salt on the roads, this should be pretty easy. Let the slave cylinder dangle down. As you can see, I'm resting the slave cylinder up against the leaf spring bracket to the frame. That seems to be a good solid position. I'm right-handed, so this is going to be a pain in the ass with the left hand, but simply position the roll pin punch against the roll pin, or the 3/32 drift pin, and use a hammer to lightly drive it out. There's the old roll pin, new roll pin. Should be the same. May make it easier to insert it if you put a little bit of grease on it. Otherwise, it should just slip right in. I'm going to leave the punch in here until I am ready to put the new slave cylinder in, because I want to lose as little fluid as possible, right? It's going to be kind of a, I don't want to say a mad dash, but work quickly. Okay, so this is a perfect example of the quote-unquote hydro lock effect that I'm trying to achieve here, or the airlock. This is full of fluid all the way down this line, and yet it's not dripping. So the next thing that you're going to want to do is go up top with this hydraulic line still dangling down. So you won't have put the slave cylinder in yet, right? This line will be dangling down against the drive shaft. Have your catch basin underneath of that, right, so it can drain down. Take the cap off very slowly, and be sure to watch the outlet of the hose where it goes into the slave cylinder for drippage. And make sure it's like a steady drip, steady stream, and it's not full of air. And that will indicate that all of the air is out of the line before you put it in. Only drip a little bit out, so that way you don't run your cylinder dry, your reservoir especially, because then you'll just push air down here and then you'll get air in the slave cylinder. So you want to make sure that that's dry. And then I'm just propping it up right there because I'm going to need to figure out how to drive this pin in. I might grab a set of needle nose pliers to hold it with, and then try to drive it in such that I do not remove the line from the slave cylinder. I'll let you know what I find out. So this is the position I found that's best for holding it. Again, leaf spring bracket, frame rail. My index, or my middle finger's holding against the clip. It's positioned between the drive shaft. And there, my thumb and my index are here so they can hold that roll pin. And my ring and pinky finger are holding on the back side of the hydraulic line. And that enables me to ensure that the hydraulic line does not come out of this master cylinder. From there, I used my right hand to very gently begin tapping in the roll pin while making sure that it's lined up with my fingers. Be very careful, this is a plastic housing, you can very easily damage it. Do note the slave cylinder goes in like this. This bit goes vertical, so the interface between the hydraulic line and the master cylinder fluid chamber inlet is going to be upright. Again, I'm leaving this yellow plastic retainer on, and you'll just want to make sure that, alright, so again, pardon my fat fingers, but you want to make sure that this clip stays on until after you've slid this into place. Make sure that your hydraulic line isn't binding against anything, isn't touching the exhaust. As you can see here, there's a relatively shitty routing of hose right next to that exhaust pipe, but that'll run all the way up to your master cylinder. And then at this point, I think that you are safe to, if you can, pop this retainer off. The way that I'm doing that is by pressing against the clutch fork and then we'll have to figure out a way to get the who's a watch it out of here, this plastic bit. It doesn't really matter, it'll come out eventually, it'll work its way out. But yeah, and that will ensure that you have proper bleeding in the master cylinder, etc. Now we're going to go up top and see how the clutch pedal feels, and then we're going to grab our 4mm or 5/32 Allen key, take your pick, and we're going to have somebody help us bleed this clutch. Unfortunately, I don't have the adapter for the Mighty Vac that will allow me to apply vacuum at the master cylinder, so we're going to have to figure out if we need to go do that. Also, be careful when you're putting a rear main seal on one of these fucking 6.9 IDIs. Piece of shit's fucking leaking all over the place. Starter's wet, exhaust is wet, clutch inspection plate's wet. Man, I even took my time. Whatever. But, go up top and make sure that your clutch pedal isn't torched. Yeah. Tell you what. Yeah, no engagement till right here. God, I fucking hate these Fords. If you don't have another person around, the way that I found to bleed the clutch is push the bench seat far enough forward that you can press the clutch down with a stick of the appropriate length, and then jam it between the seat and the pedal. And yeah, this one isn't quite, as you can see, it's still got some more travel, so I want to move the seat forward just a little bit. But yeah, this pipe's a little bit too long and my other cheater bar is a little bit too short, so this windshield scraper is going to work perfect. While you're bleeding clutch too, you'll also want to make sure that your master cylinder is open. Good God, these fucking master cylinder caps, huh? Ugh. All right. Make sure it's open and check your fluid level regularly. So just as air is a fluid, so too is water, but air is not a liquid as water is, because it doesn't have to stick together. It's the kinetic energy of the electrons, its valence shell, are not enough to turn it into a gas. And note that gases are compressible fluids, whereas liquids under Newtonian circumstances are not. I think my previous statements are correct, anyhow. Thank you, chemistry. Now, the fluid level in here is quite low, so we're going to want to top that up again. Even though we only dripped out just a little bit of fluid, it goes quite quickly. So you'll want to keep your air seal as well as your cap off to the side. Always put that air seal back in, because water, when it gets absorbed by the brake fluid here, lowers the boiling point of the brake fluid from, oh, I don't remember what it is, like 465 degrees Fahrenheit down to, you know, the boiling point of water. And if you have, especially in brakes, it's very important if you live in a hot environment and you're braking a lot, you know, your brakes heat up, you got water in that system, it's going to boil. The water boils, it turns into a vapor, it turns into a gas, right? And that gas becomes compressible, which is why you lose your brake pedal. So you've got to be very careful. Or because, you know, this clutch line is routed so close to the exhaust, and that exhaust goes anywhere from, you know, 300 to 500 degrees Fahrenheit on, you know, turbocharged diesel engines. All this is a naturally aspirated 6.9, so whatever. But anyhow, you want to make sure that you keep this as uniform as possible, he says, as he exposes brake fluid to the atmosphere. But anyhow, it's not a very humid day here. And besides, I live in a very, very dry state. There's some dirty Teflon tape on that. Now, I have the clutch pedal compressed, as you saw earlier. So the next thing that I'm going to want to do is put on a set of gloves. It is a pain in the fucking ass to do this, but you're going to have to get, I fucking hate this phone, man. Anyhow, you're going to have to get this Allen key such that it's in this orientation, basically, on the back of the slave cylinder. The back, yeah, right there, kind of where the end of this is pointing. It's going to be up above there. And because you're underneath of it, clockwise is going to be to loosen, counterclockwise is going to be to tighten. So it's going to be lefty tighty, righty loosey. And only do quarter turn at most, and that's all that you should need to do. Have somebody press the pedal. That's the first step. Crack it loose, 1/8 of a turn. Count 1 or maybe 2 seconds, and then shut it. And have them pull the pedal back up. And do that, press, crack, close, and then pull back up until you start getting fluids spurting out and you get a good pedal. This, on these trucks, can take hours. And I do mean hours of bleeding, unfortunately. I'm not entirely sure why. I really think it has to do with the internal design of the chamber of the slave cylinder. Could also be a failing master cylinder on this truck. Could also be the fact that there's no plate to prevent the stressing of the firewall and subsequent movement of the slave cylinder with relation to the pedal box, which will cause, reduced pedal to master cylinder travel because your firewall's taking up some of that slack. So there's any number of factors that could be contributing to this set of issues that I'm having with the clutch pedal. Anyhow, cheers. Now, the opening and closing of the bleeder using this Allen key I've found is generally best served by using 2 hands. Use your left hand, I think, if I remember correctly, use your left hand to press down on the top of this Allen key, and you use your right hand to crack it loose. Maybe it's the other way around, but you have to make sure that this stays aligned. Elsewise, these stupid fucking Allen keys, they just pop out, and then you have to spend 5 minutes fighting with it to get it back into its hole, because that's a little bitch. You also want to wear eye protection for this because it squirts all over the place. Make sure that your catch can is underneath of kind of the drive shaft. It'll drip down your drive shaft, your axle assembly here. It'll drip down the exhaust pipe as well. Generally I found, right about where that drip is, kind of where it comes off. So you don't want to kind of straddle everything here as best you can. I've also got some cardboard down. I've got some floor dry I can put down as well. It is just brake fluid, and it won't be too much, so I'm not terribly worried about it. But, I also am surprised by how beefy they can make this Dana 44. Unfortunately, in 1980, they switched to using the twin traction beam. Really wish they would have used a kingpin-style high pinion Dana 60. It is nice that this is a high pinion front end. I think this is a 9¼ inch front ring gear with 4 pinion contact, but I'm not sure. I'm not a Ford specialist, so don't ask me. But yeah, I mean, that's a heavy duty knuckle, even for a Dana 44. That's beefy. She needs a set of U-joints up front. Step 1, depress pedal. Step 2, go underneath the truck. See, the Allen key's already in there. Let's see if I can do this one-handed without it falling out. Crack the bleeder, going clockwise, and then close it. Don't let too much fluid out. Go back up top. Take this off, right? Pull the pedal back up, pump it a few times, but as you can see, it's still not there. Take this, or have your buddy do this. Press the clutch pedal down and repeat. Every 4th or 5th time you crack this bleeder, go up top and check to make sure that you still have enough brake fluid in your master cylinder. Now, the Ford Motor Company and the Mitchell manuals both recommend to fill up the master cylinder just to this step right here with brake fluid. Now I always fill it up more when I'm doing a bleed procedure, but that will cause it, especially if you are rapidly pumping the brake or the clutch pedal, it will cause it to splooge everywhere. So you're going to want to put some rags underneath of it. I figured out how to mention that. Perfect. So if this falls in the water, you're going to want to make sure that you wipe it off really good and that you clean it, so that way you don't contaminate the clutch fluid with water. When referring to service information for 1983 through, I think, 1987 6.9 liter diesels with this same hydraulic clutch setup, what you want to do is from the center of this clip to the center of the pivot point, or to the back of this, where the pivot point would be coming out vertically in the downward direction, you would want to measure the distance traveled. So with the clutch pedal fully out, right, so you're not pressing it in, take a straight edge or a ruler or something and measure to right here, and then have somebody press the clutch pedal as far as they can get it. And that distance from here to out to where it should move the clutch fork should be greater than or equal to 5/8 of an inch. So X is greater than or equal to 5/8. And you're going to want to make sure that it does that consistently and evenly at the center of that pivot point, because that's going to give you the best approximation. Well, well, I'm not mathematically inclined to speak, so I don't quite know how to term this, but it's going to give you the most accurate measurement of how far the clutch fork will move internally proportional to the distance traveled by the slave cylinder. All right, so another thing that I'm doing is so you've done the procedure. You've pressed the clutch pedal to the floor, put your holding tool on, crack the bleeder, close the bleeder, take your holding tool off. The clutch pedal is at the floor. So what I do is I pull it up, and then I pump it a bunch of times, quite slowly, so otherwise fluid's going to splurge everywhere. And that'll take the vacuum out of the system as well. And that'll tell you, oh, I don't have any clutch engagement until here. It's probably, what, inch and a half of clutch travel. So I'm just going to keep pumping it and then doing the procedure, pump, 5 to 10 times slowly. See how far your clutch pedal is actually going to go. Another thing you're going to want to do, 18mm wrench. In my case, put it up there on that top nut. Holy shit, my phone must be full of... Okay, 18. Put it on the top nut right here. Make sure she's tight. Ooh. Yeah, that'd explain a lot. Well, you get the picture. Fucking piece of shit, Schittsburg fucking wrench. All right.